want to take a picture of you guys. Get this, see if that light will block over here. I'm going to bring you guys up here with me for a moment. So, while he's queuing up the deck here, I'll just kind of set things up. What I'm going to talk to you today is, we've heard a lot of things about unmet needs and things that happen at the beginning of the process, and a lot of kind of sexy, generative, ethnographic kind of stuff. And all this stuff's really great and really fun. But I want to talk to you about what happens further down the line. What happens when we have several good concepts to think about, and the clients are confused about which ones to choose, the design team is confused about which one to choose. You know, do we make subjective decisions about choosing this concept over this concept, so forth. But before I get into talking about concept testing and what goes on there and the specifics of that methodology, I just kind of wanted to lay out for you guys, how I kind of feel about design research. Let's see if I can get this thing going here. So I wanted to hit you with a big image here. This is actually my son, Sam. He was born 2 months premature, and we spent quite a few, actually like a month and a half in the NICU, and it was a really rough time. And something I actually learned from that experience was that when I was in that space every day, like almost 24 hours a day, except for the 2 hours I made you leave to come to do the shift change, I noticed something that was happening. That the people in that space were constantly shaping themselves, shaping their processes to understand what you need, to make you feel more comfortable, and to provide better care for your child. And I found that pretty interesting, that it was like the place itself, the NICU kind of had this womb-like feeling, and I thought that was really interesting how the processes adapted to that. So I want you guys to kind of keep that in mind. But he's healthy and happy now. That's Sam. I actually just want to see how big I can get his head in here. That's my other daughter, Matilda. So, what do you guys kind of picture in your minds when you think of design research? There's probably a few things that pop in there. I don't know if this was actually what you were thinking about. This is something that, is quite common in design research. Wacky, crazy people breaking down your designs and making you feel terrible about the things that you've made. So, this woman actually was participating in one of the sessions, and we were working on a product for facial care. It was a handheld device. And the first thing she did was picked it up and started singing some Frank Sinatra song. I can't remember what it was. And we were all looking at her like, you just destroyed our design. You destroyed all of our thinking, everything we're thinking about. And one of the designers was in the room, and he had a really hard time recovering from that. And it was, we actually had like a 5-minute discussion before everybody came in the room, like, oh, we actually really like this concept. This is going to be a really good one. Has really great ways of balancing on the top of your arm. It's going to be really, really interesting. People are going to love it. And of course, she comes in and sings us into oblivion. So yesterday, Daryl kind of scooped me a bit when he was talking about Louis Cheskin and Louis Cheskin predicting the failure of the Edsel. The Edsel for me is also something that I kind of keep in the back of my mind when I think about design research, because design research actually could have saved the Edsel. It could have saved it from being the worst I told you so in marketing automotive history. When people looked at the Edsel when it first came out, it was, wow, that thing looks like a horse collar. I don't know what that thing is. And besides the obvious aesthetic problems with the Edsel, there was a major usability problem with the Edsel. And I often don't hear people talk about this very much when they talk about the failure of the Edsel. But the steering column had something stuck right in the middle. It's a little kind of a gear shift system they call the teletouch system. And these are little buttons that you press to kind of change modes for driving. And the first thing I guess no one thought of is that, that's where the horn goes. Why would we put a bunch of buttons where the horn goes? So a very simple question to someone might have solved that issue. And to take it one step further, they totally changed the taxonomy, the nomenclature of what these letters usually stand for. So D is now drag, L is for leap. I don't even know what leap means. Dukes of Hazzard kind of thing going on there. And, you know, R for race. It's 1958, you know, drag racing's big, James Dean and so forth. But, you know, you can ask people things, right? You can set up elaborate focus groups to ask people questions about, you know, what's going to be good for this product, what's going to be good for that product, what's a new kind of product that you can help us with. I don't know if you guys have seen this episode.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people in the room have seen this. But for those of you who hadn't, I'll fill you in a little. Homer finds out he has a long-lost brother, and he happens to be an automobile mogul. And you know, throughout the course of getting to know Homer and having like these back and forth sessions with his scientists about, you know, we're designing the next Integra, the Allegra, and all these kind of wacky car names, and he gets kind of fed up. And he's like, I want a car for the common man. So Homer kind of walks in. He's got like a corn dog in one hand and a piece of pizza in another hand and mustard on his shirt. And he's like, you will design my next car. You are the common man. So he puts Homer in the lab with all these people, and he comes up with this beautiful, lovely car. But for me, this really kind of gets to one point, is that, you know, we can speak to users all we want, but they really need, especially later down into the process, they need more guidance. They need help from us to facilitate how they're going to interact. Because a lot of the times we're asking them to participate in very kind of complex design thinking, design activities. And a lot of times they can feel very lost when they get thrown into these situations. And so one of the things I'm going to be trying to make a point with concept testing with you guys today is that we're going to put these kinds of guidance, these kinds of structures in place. So what is it? What is concept testing? I'll make it really easy for you. So you start with 3 people, right? It's actually lots of groups of 3 people in various segments. And you know, we try to obviously do a range of segments as usual. You know, you go for the outliers, you go for the early adopters, the majority, you know, any kind of thing that you can bring in, just to get a swath of people that are going to be looking at what you're doing. But then let's just focus on one of the groups for a minute. So the first thing you do is you have to look at 3 concepts, and you color code those concepts. And something I'll mention about the concepts is that one of the first things that happens in the design process, in our studio in particular, is that when we think about the concepts, we don't just think about churning out a bunch of concepts. I mean, we do that, and, you know, we sketch and we move through a lot of things. But we try to think of those concepts as having a range from extreme to very common, so that when people are looking at these things, they'll be able to kind of react to. It's almost like having a control group in kind of a way, you know. So you have this really far out concept, and it will spark a lot of interesting discussion, but it creates an interesting rhythm discussion. Then we, you know, we have worksheets. That's one of the structuring elements of this process. So those worksheets, and I'll go over those in a little bit more detail in a moment. What we do is we have people focus individually. So we introduce the concepts to them, and then we have them stop talking to each other. We don't have them say what all their first impressions are and to bias the other people. We have them immediately focus on these sheets for a moment and write down a few things, and I'll show you what those are in a moment. And then after that, we discuss things within the context of how these sheets are structured. We have a quick discussion about that. And then we pull people together, and we have another worksheet that they work around. Anybody that's taken the concept testing workshop is going to get to experience all this firsthand. We pull those people together, and we essentially have them, it's structured in a way that it creates kind of an argument among the people to kind of talk about what they've learned and what they've come to understand in this first, you know, grouping, first worksheet. Then we have them expand on that conversation and talk about kind of the design language of what they're looking at. And that's another thing about when we put these concepts together, there's a very specific design language that we have to put in place. So there's form, color, material, all these kinds of things, haptics, ergonomics. There's a very set kind of language for that, so that we can understand later how to parse those things out based on what people say. And then there's 3 possible paths that can happen from this. This is all depending on where you are in the process, right? So you can go into this kind of path where, like, the first path up there where everybody loves one concept, and there's a lot of good reasons for why they like that concept. and they select that concept, and that will be kind of one of the basis for helping us make a recommendation to the client. And then there's a second element where they can hybridize something. So maybe there's two that they really like, and they're not quite sure where to go, but there's specific things about both of them that they like. So we kind of bring those together into a more salient kind of concept. And then there's this third aspect where we can be further along, and we have three very solid concepts, and we can go into kind of a usability mode. We can think about what are the usability aspects on top of all these other kind of formal qualities and ergonomic qualities. So that gives us, our three alternatives. And that's it's a very interesting place for the client to see that we're at. They have three possible directions they can go in. And let me break away for a minute and talk a little bit about process before I get back to the details of concept testing. So, there's a lot of different ways of thinking about the research process. One of the ways that I really kind of think about it is the generative and the evaluative. We're kind of doing all this stuff up front, and then we're doing all this stuff at the end. But when I started developing the concept testing methodology, I really kind of started to see it as this new middle space, which is kind of like it's a direction, right? So before you get down to any kind of really solid usability kind of things happening in the end, there's this moment when you got to pick a clear direction where to head to really start doing refinements. And we're thinking about industrial design. There's a lot of implications there, and digital as well. There's a lot of implications there about even a simple placement of a button, how that's going to have ramifications down the manufacturing line. So being kind of a directional moment is very important. So let's just think about design for a moment as a straight line. So we start out, there's me, analyst, Deborah, program manager, Willie, he's actually a senior industrial designer at Frog. And we generally do work in small teams like this, especially on the product side. We tend to work very kind of small, lightweight teams. The office in New York for Frog is actually only 50 people, and we can be handling anywhere from up to, 80 projects a month. So there's quite a bit of resourcing going on there. So we'll start out, we'll make a research plan, project plan, scope of work, so forth. Then we'll kind of jump into things, and we'll just look at what the landscape is for what we're looking at. So we'll just say right now that this is kind of something in a facial care industry, and it's a handheld device. So we kind of get just the landscape of what's going on. We do some retail tours into drugstores. We just kind of scrape the web and create these giant mood boards and have discussions about the different design language things that are happening between each one of these things, what market needs they're meeting, what they're not. Then we find some people to talk with, and it's generally more than 6 people. When we're starting our research program, we generally like to start the number around 8, and the more the better, actually, I'm finding. But I found that in terms of time-wise, it's you can usually top out at like 8, something like that. Then we go into their homes and we talk to them, and we sneak into their bathrooms and we take pictures of all the stuff in their bathrooms and root through their cabinets, and they go, "What are you doing? Why are you in my bathroom? Don't touch that." And we try to explain to them why we're in there. But we get a sense of where these products, some of these people have these products already, and some of them don't. We get a sense of where they're living, what are some places they could live, how are they organizing things, what is their kind of product architecture in the bathroom. Then we start creating some models, and we start sketching and pulling things together. And then we go around and we test those things with people, just quick kind of prototypes, just to get a sense of, just from an ergonomic standpoint, even if we're headed in the right direction. Then we refine those a bit, do a little more research on top of that. We bring some people into the studio, have some more solid participatory design sessions, get user drawings, create these big mood boards, have them react. Actually, one thing I did there that was kind of fun was I went through and trolled through drugstore.com and all the comment trails about these particular products, and I created a board with that and with the images, and had the people in the group have a conversation back with that. And there was actually some really kind of interesting things that came out of that. It was kind of a new conversation there. So you're gathering all these insights about what these things are, and you're moving ahead. You do some more sketches, right? And then finally you get into like the concepts. Here you are. Looks really easy, right? All this stuff going on. So the client's next intuition is usually, we have some concepts, let's have a focus group. That's going to be great. We'll have like 8 focus groups and we'll know exactly which concept to go forward with. So my first reaction was to say, okay, let's think about this, because the client that we've been doing this work with, even the first time that we actually had an engagement with them, it was to meet at a focus group and look at some prototypes they had. So their first intuition is always to go to a focus group when we have some solid concepts. So I said, give me a day and let me come back to you and we'll think about a different way to do this. And I stayed up all night, figured out something. And the one reason I wanted to avoid that, because focus groups, I've moderated focus groups, I've been part of focus groups, I've stepped behind the glass of focus groups, and this is what generally always happens. There's one guy, one woman in the room, completely hijacks the whole thing, and it's like becomes a big mess, and there's somebody huddled in the corner crying, like, I can't participate in this group, I don't even know what's going on anymore. So I wanted to avoid this, and I didn't want our designs to go into this kind of environment, and I didn't think the client would benefit from that. And the big thing for me also about focus groups is there's people behind the glass, and when we do research at Frog and we bring people into the office, we try to use facilities as little as possible. So if we're doing research, we always try to use one of our global offices to conduct the research if we're not going into people's homes. Because I think there's a lot to be said about bringing people into the studio environment and having them participate with designers, with the actual whole team as a part of that. So one of the big things about avoiding kind of that focus group mentality is that I think there is a complexity there. It's kind of an emotional complexity, it's a cognitive complexity. It's very hard for some people to engage in that space. So I wanted to reduce that a bit. I love this quote from Herbert Simon. I don't know if anybody of you guys have ever read Sciences of the Artificial. It's a great book. But there's this little statement in here where he talks about an ant's behavior. And then if you're watching an ant move through, if an ant was just to crawl across this floor, right, in a straight line, you go, well, his behavior's not very complex. But if he has lots of little obstacles in his way, and he's moving around, you go, wow, he's making a lot of decisions. His behavior is actually very complex. He must be a really, really smart ant. But this idea of like the complexity of the environment, like reducing the complexity of the environment. So thinking back to the NICU kind of idea and making a nurturing space, and then at the same time reducing the complexity of an environment that you're going to bring users into to have these kind of discussions around design, that's something that's really driving some of the things I'm going to talk to you about. And there's another thing about reducing complexity. This is Willie. He's a designer, really nice guy. I think he's getting drunk right here. There's something about the way that we work at Frog. We're a company that's been around for about 40 years, and we work across industrial design to digital, so we do quite a range of different projects. And we have a lot of people in the studio that are kind of specialized, like mechanical engineers. And then we have some more people who are generalists, like myself, who kind of work across different disciplines. Because myself coming from a fine arts background and then going and doing a master's in instructional design and technology, I kind of have a different range of looking at things. Whereas somebody like Willie is very hardcore schooled in industrial design, and he didn't have a lot of contact with research or with kind of those kinds of things. So it's really about making something that is going to be useful for Willie to participate in, and even sometimes if he has to lead and to think about becoming a design researcher as well as a designer. So part of this is really about making kind of like shareable frameworks, so these little shareable research frameworks that you can kind of evangelize throughout the studio, because if you're not getting full buy-in from people a lot of times in the studio about what the value of research is, one of the ways to do that is to make it easier for people to adopt. But I was actually thinking about it, and it's not really like a framework, it's more like a scaffolding. I pulled that back from my days in education. Scaffolding was like the hot word. The reason I use scaffolding is because Scaffolding builds up around something that already exists or that's being constructed. So it's not kind of like an abstract framework, it's something that's actually molding around something that has reusable parts that you can kind of shape in different ways to, you have a small building or a big building, you can reshape these parts to kind of fit that. And there's instructions for doing it, right? So what we're really talking about here is, is a structured interviewing process to kind of get to the meat of what these well-formed concepts are. And to, first, to kind of support participants in the engagement of these kind of complex activities, big thing. And then, to give designers the structure to understand the research objectives. That's another thing that I'm finding is helping facilitate relationships between what the frog role of the design analyst and the designer role coming together under the umbrella of design research. And then something else that is going to be happening here that you're going to see is visualizing qualitative data. So we saw a lot of great examples like mode mapping. That was a very interesting speech, and it's really kind of this way of visualizing qualitative data that clients really, I think they really find interesting. And determining clear design direction. That's at the end of the day is what we need to do, right? So the method, it's very simple as you saw before. I want to kind of layer it into a few sections for you guys. So like one of the ways that we usually kind of enter into this, is something we do. It's called memory immersion, and really all that is just depending on what the theme or the domain we're working in is, we ask people to draw something from memory to kind of spark what they're thinking about. And then the next thing is value lensing. That's that moment when we're focusing, and I'll get some more detail about that in a minute. And then polar ordering. That all sounds very mysterious, right? And then we have three possible branches that we can go into. So we have hybridizing, improving, or using, and that's really kind of talking about usability. So we have these entry points and these exit points. We have the kind of the memory immersion idea can change sometimes and be different kinds of activities, and those can all be adapted from other kinds of things like participatory design, ethnography, but just a way of getting the session kind of started. But those two kind of points in the middle, the value lensing and the polar ordering, which I'm going to go into more detail about, that's the kind of the key flexible points in this. And then exit points, which are those branches I was mentioning. So memory immersion, focusing through recall. So this was actually for a printer project. So we just, Kobe, who's in the audience here, my colleague, who'll be running the workshop with me, this was a project they were doing, and they essentially just had people draw their printers from memory. And what you do is that you kind of understand what are the pain points, what are the things that people really find useful in a printer, and it's all coming from memory. And here's a project I did a couple years ago for the design of a set-top box interface. And the first thing I wanted to understand is what is the kind of flows, what is the tasks that people are finding most important when they do that. And the first times I was asking people this question, they weren't really kind of getting it. They weren't understanding. So I said, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you draw your memory or your remote from memory? And what you remember, tell me why you removed that particular thing. And then kind of draw a little map. And here's what kind of came out of that is that, these kind of rudimentary kind of drawings, but little key elements, like the list button and so forth. And then all these kind of superfluous elements that are up there at the top, like these hardware mode switching buttons. When people were doing those, I was like, well, why are you focusing on those things that you don't use very much? And they were like, well, because they're at the top of the thing, and it's the first thing I look at, and they're the brightest thing on the remote. So, right there. And we eventually went into redesigning the remote as well. So those were some kind of good insights. But the main thing here is that we started a discussion and got to some core tasks and core behaviors of what people were doing. Their little beautiful remote drawing. So value lensing, individual focus. So I remember I told you we had people fill out forms. This is one of those forms. So the first thing I'm going to mention about this thing is that we try to design these things in a way that adds a new kind of dimension to the experience for participants. So it's not just a dry list of things. It has kind of this, it has a design to it. So the basic things that are happening here is, we'll show some people things, and before they talk to each other, we'll say, okay, write down your first impression of what you thought about that. And, do it for both concepts. And then we explain to them what these values are, and I'll explain how we get to those values in a moment. And we say, okay, now look at the concepts and rate them. So it's kind of this unidimensional scaling, right? So what's that called? A Likert scaling. So you say with these values, 1 being lowest, 5 being highest, rank these things for us. And then we leave a common space when we actually have a discussion. So once they do this for each concept, we then we have a discussion about the concepts. And it's fairly a loose discussion framed around the design language. But we generally like to let people drive that because we have physical models for them to hold onto, and we have concept renderings for them to look at. So one of the main things is that they're interacting with something, so we kind of let them drive the discussion a little bit. And we use these as kind of the anchor point. So then they can write some comments down, and then, before they tell anybody else, we have them kind of secretly write down your favorite. So those values that I was talking about, this is actually something where we bring the client into the actual design or the research. I can't show you a lot of those things, but this is just a little tiny frame of that. So we'll take the core kind of brand values, and we'll create some kind of taxonomies around those core brand values, and then we'll talk about what they want to achieve in terms of usability goals, and we'll frame some general kind of usability values. But it's something that we do with the client, and they know when going into this that these values are going to be rated against these concepts, and that they have full input into what these values are. And we try to do it a lot across a lot of different departments. So if there's an engineering team involved, they're there. If there's a marketing team, they're also involved. So people fill these forms out. That's what we do. We're collecting, we're scoring. So just kind of look at the space that this is happening in, right? So we have models all laid out. We have the people filling out the form. So they're kind of focusing for a moment. And so when we come away with that, later after we do kind of the initial analysis of everything and we kind of pull the data together, we create these kinds of brackets, right? So we have a way of thinking about, let's say this is group A right here. So group A scores kind of fell out into this little block. So immediately we kind of have a picture of what they were thinking about. And this is, this is a supportive element. This is not the main finding. So more people kind of in action. You can see, I think the really interesting thing when I watch people do this is we give them those moments to kind of hold the models and play around with things and get up and walk around the room and look at them. We intentionally put the renderings in a space where they have to get up and move over there and look around. So we force them to kind of get up and be a little bit more involved in the space. But watching them kind of, investigate the models, go back to the form, investigate the models, go back to the form, it's this moment of kind of solitude. I think it was really interesting that people, they give it more thought than they might usually. Of course I can't, quantitatively prove that, but it's based on observation I can kind of get that feeling. So people just kind of looking and engaging with models. And at this point, the team is kind of holding back for a minute. We're there if they have any questions, but we're kind of letting them focus for a moment and just kind of be on their own. So at the end of the day, let's say we worked with 3 groups. So we have a range of what 3 people were thinking about individually, or what 3 groups were thinking about individually about each one of these concepts. And each color line represents a concept, obviously. So if we look at some of these values, which I can't read at all right here, like simplicity, which is at 4 o'clock there. So you start to see some consistent elements, and I pulled these actually from some real studies we did last year. You see that simplicity is ranking pretty high, and that this thing actually, the red concept has its overall shape is pretty good, but it's down on color, right? And we're seeing a little bit more peaks in color. And when we take those things and we look at what people were actually saying and the nuances about what they were talking about color, and let's say that there's something that happens in the end where one device actually rated higher, but most everybody else didn't like it. What's happening there is that people attach themselves to one particular thing in that device, like color, and they make an overall judgment based on one value. And these graphs help us kind of weed through those and read through all the notes and all the kind of the qualitative stuff and help us think about how we're going to communicate this to the client. And when you get even bigger, you have more groups, you start to see even more patterns, right? So actually, the more groups of 3, the better that you can fit it in. And we adapt these sheets sometimes too. We add extra little components to them. We try to keep them fairly simple. This is a more complex one, but we actually had people select colors as they went along in here as well. This was for a package design, I think. And then we started to actually grab other things too, like when we asked people what your favorite was initially, and then after the discussion, what was your favorite when we ended? So we start to see that people are holding on to certain things. What was your least favorite? What was your least favorite when you ended? And it's kind of a way of confirming sometimes if you feel that some people in a group have a bias towards a particular thing, these graphs can actually kind of be useful in helping with that. So moving out of like the individual, right, and bringing everybody back to a group and having them kind of interact with each other. So we create these sheets, and this was a really early one, so that sheet's not so pretty. But what we do is we take the values that we had, and we take the exact opposite, right? And this is also something that we do with the client. And we have people, let's say we have 4 concepts or 5 concepts. We have them place the concepts between those values. So like, for instance, blue's already taken up the most positive one there, so there's only 4 left. So they have to range them out on that. And what they're doing is they're doing this as a group. So some people are going to have something they like more than others, so they kind of have to negotiate this and talk about why this one should be here as opposed to here. And this is kind of a slippery slope sometimes, because then you can get into that kind of element of a focus group where somebody is a little bit more stronger voice. But we try to handle that a little bit through mediation and stepping in and asking kind of subtle questions. But the main thing here is that they are discussing the things, and this is something we actually observe. So we try to stay out of it as much as possible, and we've always found that this sparks a really, really interesting discussion between people about the concepts. And they bring up elements about the concepts that they wouldn't normally just by just generally asking them. So it's creating a new kind of argument scenario, argument of the market, so to speak. And capturing these arguments is something we want to get a little more depth to. Unfortunately, like at Frog, our projects tend to range from like 6 weeks to 8 weeks, so we don't have a lot of time to do things. But in the future, I would really love to like video these things and really analyze the video of these. So here's one of those forms to block out you see these black boxes anywhere? That's when I marked out the client's name, protect them a little bit. So here's just one of those sheets. So you guys in the workshop are going to get to work on a big one, big 33-footer. So when we take those and we look at what people have done, we can kind of quickly start to see some of these spikes and patterns and peaks and valleys and kinds of things. And what we want to look at in this particular thing is to see what the difference is between on the left and what the difference is on the right. And if are there similarities, are there anything that's glaringly different? And most of the time we find that there are a lot of similarities, but there's always like an interesting moment where you go, why did this one peak lower here? And why was it? And you kind of go back and you look at all your notes, or you look at the audio recordings, you listen back, and you can kind of use these as anchors, as guides to think about all that qualitative data that you pull together. Here's actually one of these things. This is for like a remote control that we did. But in terms of talking to the client, we like to group findings, recommendations based on these graphs to kind of anchor the client. And this one was actually really interesting because the blue concept was one that we actually ended up going with, I think, for this particular project. And the thing is like it had this really big dip in the center, this big dipper kind of moment. And there were some actually very subtle cues when we did another round of testing for people to understand why it wasn't memorable, why it wasn't, I think that says intuitive, or appealing. there was these particular things we could look at to understand why people were talking about those things and where we can make adjustments to counteract that. So, hi guys. This is a kind of like a participatory activity, but a lot of the times it's really just taking those core elements and having people Frankenstein a new kind of thing from that. And we don't take this away and say this is the new design, we're going to use this. It's really just kind of looking at which core elements they found and how they see, in terms of like a remote control or something, how they see kind of the layout of the keypad as talking about their interactions and the way they want to interact with a particular set-top box software. And if we look at that and we take all that and we look at it across all the segments that we have, and again, I mentioned that before, like we have a range of the segments, right? So we look at all this kind of stuff across each one of these segments, all these designs across each one of these segments. So improving your favorite. This is a little bit more targeted, so we'll actually bring in some kind of sketches, and that's Willie's hands right there. He'll actually kind of work with them to kind of draw, or have them draw onto these kind of blueprint-esque drawings to talk about where are the little subtle corners. What I was feeling this and it wasn't quite right, so I'm going to level that out a little bit. And we get to some more of the details about a particular concept. And this really is if the group was able to decide on a favorite and how they want to refine that favorite. And then usability. So one of the things with this particular device, I can't tell you what this device is, but there was a big thing with button placement because there was a very sophisticated mechanism that was on this device that involved a laser, and the button placement was very important to people. So we had people think about where the button would be in terms of the laser mechanism. So we had a bunch of different placed across. And those colors represent the different functions of the buttons, obviously. Or there's just, strict usability, thinking about tasks that people are going to perform with these things. So this could be at the moment when we have a fairly well-defined concept, and it actually has, it's more of a high fidelity prototype. It has to have some working components on it. And we actually put people into those scenarios when they're using these things. So we actually took some of these people into the bathrooms at one point. To use this device, and it's not normally used there, but we wanted to get a sense of if they happen to be in there in a steamy kind of room, what kind of the reaction would this be. Another picture of someone trying it down here. And I could show you like 1,000 of these because we try to. That's one thing we try to do is try to capture each moment to kind of give tell the story of everything that's happening. So a lot of times in these sessions. We have someone that's dedicated just to taking photography, and they're kind of like, the journalists running around the room. So, kind of bringing it all back together. So it's the forms that lead to these kind of representations of the data. And then the group activity. And let me show you this is from one of the deliverables to a client. And I blocked out all the images of the product, obviously. And this is just a summary of that deck. So, we'll kind of start out by presenting, this was the winner, and this was this runner-up, and here's the problems with the ones that weren't so well liked. Here's our recommendations about where to move forward. And if it differs a little bit with what the graphs are saying, that's something that we have to really kind of understand how to communicate back to the client why we're recommending this, as opposed to the way people were scoring certain things. And just because something does get a lower score, doesn't mean that it can't be improved in some way